everyone, I'm Robert Sane, and I'd like to welcome you to our garden. It's been a while since I've had a video out here, and I wanted to use the garden sort of as a segue to talk about what's going to be happening this Sunday in worship and in the sermon at Holy Communion. It's going to be from the 24th chapter of Luke's Gospel. In that story, it's actually the third resurrection story, or a story about the appearance of our Lord. But you can see here to your right is this is a bed of cabbage. I've got some more cabbage beside of it and behind it. And here are a couple of rows of some heading lettuce. It's a red lettuce and a green buttercrunch lettuce. These don't form tight heads like cabbage, but they do head up that a head will, by the time I harvest them in a few weeks, there's actually a couple that are getting close right now. There'll be certainly enough for a family of 4 to use for salad. And then way back here in these beds, I've got broccoli here and in front of me, and pak choy. So all of my raised beds, these 6 raised beds plus the 6 square raised beds plus the 2 rectangular, are completely filled. I also have a bed that is onions that's there in the foreground in front of me, and some leeks. Those were planted last fall. The ones on the right side of the bed I started from seed about 2 months ago and transplanted them this week. And here, just below the raised beds, I have my scuppernons and muscadines. I pruned them late, but they are beginning to bud out now. And finally, I've got 4 rows of English peas that are coming up. I had to plant them about 6 weeks ago during a window when we had a few days of dry weather, and it was actually, the ground was really too wet when I planted these, and they had a hard time coming up. They finally did. I'm getting ready to trellis them next week. You can also see that I put some leaf compost here. I'll be putting another row over here, not of peas, but of something else. And then I've got 2 20 by 30 foot beds back here that okra, tomatoes, peppers, squash, zucchini, those kinds of crops will be going into those beds. Well, I've shown you my garden. Now I want to show just a little bit of Susan's garden. It's here beside my garden. You may see there in the lower right-hand corner, azaleas are in the full bloom. There's irises that are beginning to bloom behind me. Some variegated ivy that's on this little pergola. This is a place I come and sit quite a bit. There's some Japanese maples, just a whole variety of plants, daylilies and other kinds of things that'll come up over the course of the summer. I wanted to connect my gardening with what I was talking about earlier from the Gospel of Luke. And there's a theme or something that the author of Luke tells. And he says that in the text today that Jesus opened the minds, their minds, that is the minds of the disciples. He opened their minds. There are things in our life that we need to open our minds to all around us. For instance, I grew up learning to garden in a traditional way with rows, and that's a great way to garden. In fact, I'm going to be doing some of that this year. But I also discovered raised beds, and you're able to control weeds much better. You're able to provide moisture much better without wetting the foliage. You're able to condition the soil much better. And especially as you get older, I would suggest that you make your beds high enough that you can sit on a stool, or either like mine are, my beds are timbers that are wide enough that you can actually sit on, because it does help as we get older to be able not to have to bend over or get down on your knees. My mind has been opened up to a new way of discovering how to grow things. And by the way, Susan and I can't possibly eat all this food that we're growing, and so we are partnering with the food pantry at Daniel's Lutheran Church this summer. This is a start. It's not going to be a huge volume of food, but it will be a beginning. And I've been told that there's a way that other home gardeners can sign up with a website that will direct them to local food pantries that they can help to supplement those pantries with food. And I'll see if I can get that up in a later video. In all of Luke's 24th chapter, there are 3 resurrection accounts of Jesus. The one when the women go to the tomb. The second one is the 2 disciples who are traveling back to their home in Emmaus when they meet Jesus. And it's actually after meeting Jesus that these 2 disciples run all the way back to Jerusalem to where the other disciples are gathered, and they're in the process of telling them about their encounter with Jesus when suddenly Jesus appears in their midst and says, "Peace be to you." That's the account in today's story. But the text goes on to say that Jesus opened their minds to the scriptures, that they had been, I suppose it would be safe to say, they were closed-minded to the scriptures before, and it was Jesus who opened their minds. It reminds me of a similar phrase in just a few previous verses back in the Road to Emmaus story, when the 2 followers of Jesus, as they walked with him, they invited him into their homes for dinner, and it was in the midst of the breaking of the bread that suddenly their eyes were opened, and they understood and saw who Jesus was. What does that look like? A great example I'd like to share with you is centering prayer. And centering prayer is essentially being quiet and still, and it's not a necessarily meditation, but one should choose a sacred word. And what the word is doesn't matter so much as it's a word that will resonate with your soul. When centering prayer begins, it's as if you're trying to turn off your mind from thoughts. Now, thoughts are going to come, but when they do come, use that word to draw you back away from those thoughts. In fact, Father Thomas Keating, I believe, is the one who said, just pretend that you're sitting beside a river, and whenever you have a thought, just toss it back into the river in the same way that a leaf falls from a tree and just drifts away down the river. So there's not necessarily a goal of centering prayer. One experiences the fullness of God when one relinquishes one's own attempt to control God by our thoughts. So in centering prayer, you will think about things, but it's only when you become aware that you're thinking of it. And it's when we become aware that then we sometimes begin to try to control what we're thinking about. Centering prayer is also like just how, as a grandparent, there's nothing more special than to hold your grandchild in your arms, and if they go to sleep on your shoulder, that's just an added bonus. But centering prayer in prayer is like crawling up into God's lap without any demands and simply being present with God. As I look at this, having one's mind open to God is in a sense turning off one's mind. That's a change in the way we think about praying. Normally, we think of praying with words. We think of prayer in terms of demands of God, but in this case, it's being open to the mind of Christ. I would encourage you to talk with one of our Bible study and centering prayer participants. If you're a member of Holy Communion, that's Judy Townsend, Rick Townsend. We've got Georgiana Kicklighter, and we have Rosa Green. So talk to any of them, and they and we, and I say they because in just a few weeks my time as interim pastor at Holy Communion will be coming to an end. I'm going to do a video about that next week, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about that now. But this group, their intention is that they want to continue their centering prayer. It's every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. And you can look down in the description about this video, and we'll provide a link to that Zoom meeting. Have a great day, and we'll see you again in the garden. Bye-bye.